Do you have a brother or sister slash maybe potential best friend that you know it since like middle school, right? Where like you grew up together. If there's anybody that knows you, it's this person. You got in trouble together. You figured out how to put like lunch trays underneath your rear wheels on your front wheel drive car so you could inevitably run into a curb and pray mom just doesn't find out. And y'all, you pretty much had each other's backs. There was like family all over the place in this thing. And no matter what, there were rules, guidelines, and expectations that if one of you went to jail, the other one would have bailed you out before anyone even caught wind of it. Because that's just what good friends do. If someone got in a fight, you'd back them up, knowing you'd probably lose anyway. Why? Because we love our friends. You're our friends. It's a good thing. But there's really not like too much to typically gain from those relationships outside of the fact that they'll inevitably be the person that carries you through the hard days. I don't know how to segue this into family. I'm Alex at F5 on Instagram, and today we're going to be talking about something extremely similar, but in the automotive industry, a thing that we've heard about through whispers and old forum posts, something that everyone has a different story, idea, or reason as to why it exists. Something depending on who you talk to, you're always going to get a different answer. We're talking about the interesting, the odd, the kind of sort of comic book origins of the history of the JDM Gentleman's Agreement. I hold the door open for people at an uncomfortable distance that causes them to run because I enjoy the pain it creates, and then they say, oh, thanks. I say you're welcome, and then I do it again because it's fun. I'm that guy. Hey, if you're looking for a place that knows wheels, tires, wheel fitment, or suspension, wheel and tire packages, the best way to win a PvP battle in RuneScape, you have come to the right place. Fitment Industries, baby, all right? FitmentIndustries.com. We've got everything you could possibly want on our website, plus a big ass gallery so you can see what wheels, tires, and suspension fit your car. You can check it out over there. Plus, we mount and balance wheels and tires together, which is actually a really big deal because if you've ever had to put wheels and tires separately in your car, you know how much of a pain in the ass it is. Plus, on the same time, when you go to the actual tire shop to put the tires on the wheels, everybody gets really, really judgmental because you decided to go with a 9.5 on an 11-inch wheel because you wanted a little bit of stretch. We don't judge you because we are those people. All right, and drop a comment below if you think there's another gentleman's agreement out there in the automotive industry that no one knows about. Is there something out there in the world where companies or people are agreeing to something unofficially to help make amends in some sort of situation? A gentleman's agreement, though, in its base format is quite simply a spit in the hand and a handshake agreeing to something in regards to any sort of activity that could be mutually beneficial to both parties. Like the left Twix and the right Twix agreeing that they got to do business together, and they've happened since the dawn of time, okay? One of the largest gentlemen's agreements ever officially date back to 1907, where the United States of America and Japan came to an agreement where the US would not impose any restrictions on Japanese immigration, but Japan would not allow for further emigration. Emigration, it actually took me a minute to figure that out, means to leave a country. Who knew that was actually a word? To the United States. This action was done by Teddy Roosevelt, the then president, to help calm some growing issues between the countries due to the fact that there was a massive influx of Japanese workers coming to the States to work on labor positions as the United States was continuing to grow. Created a lot of internal issues, all right? And it was a bad time. And it was only 100 years ago, too. But the gentleman's agreement aren't always a bad thing, or to try and keep away a bad thing. It's what helped JP Morgan in the early 20th century prevent financial collapse in the States, because lo and behold, we go into recessions every 20 or 30 years. It's what allowed the iron and coal companies to not overcompete in their own spaces and rather focus on their own pieces of the trade, essentially saying, I'll look this way and you look that way. But gentlemen's agreements are predominantly unwritten and never officially super duper legal. It's like a pinky promise, but when it comes to corporations and industries, it's a pinky promise with millions of dollars. So in the late 70s, as automobile manufacturers began to establish themselves in Japan, the eyes on the prize was to make a better, more economical, ergonomic vehicle for the Japanese domestic market, which was exclusive. This issue was predominantly exclusive to Japan's vehicles. Now, different world than the USA, but companies like Mitsubishi, Mazda, Nissan, and Toyota were really pushing the bounds to try and find new technologies and innovations that push their vehicles faster than ever before. And with the assistance of the Japanese economic situation stabilizing in the 80s and in the 90s, there was some hay in the 90s, but besides that, car manufacturers in Japan were inherently kings in the industry. They were the guys, all right? But one thing that was a little bit odd for people like you and people like me was that no matter where you seem to look, specifically with Japanese sports cars, is that when they were introduced, they were all introduced with 276 horsepower or 280 PS. No matter what was inside of the actual engine bay, 276, what was publicized, it was promoted, it was spoken on. No matter what. I mean, you could have inline 4s and V10s, 276. R32 GTR, 276. Mitsubishi GTO, 276. 300ZX, 276. They didn't make 276 horsepower. They all made varying differences of horsepower, which you didn't really catch on to until later. So why? That's where the conspiracies begin. Like lightning, wah, the evil laugh. Okay, sorry. Was it because back in the day during production runs with power plants that the technology that existed at the time and was readily available to read engine power was only up to 276 horsepower, and that's why? If you actually go out and explore the forum pages of the World Wide Web, you needed to enter that in back in the day before entering in the domain, by the way. You'll see individuals going as far back as to correlate the decision with airplane manufacturing of Mitsubishi Motors during the Second World War, spawning the inevitable decision to landlock this odd 3-digit number, because the toolkits that they were using for the airplanes was what was used in the car manufacturing in the 80s and 90s, and that just capped out at 276. But that doesn't really make much sense. Technology in the 70s and even earlier wasn't inherently the best, but it could still read horsepower, crank power, really much any type of engine information you could possibly want. So that doesn't really check out, and it gets the stamp of FI disbelief on this claim. All in favor, say aye. Sean?
Aye.
Thank you. Or was it because of the JGTC, or the Japan Grand Touring Championship, and their classes such as the GT300 class, which restricted modifications and forced car manufacturers to perform with base platform performance for first position success? A little better than the previous theory. After all, the JGTC is pretty strict. It watches its vehicles fairly closely, at least back in the day. And the specifications for the class aligned with the theory over time. You need to have a 5 or 6 speed gearbox, you need a minimum of 4 cylinders, maximum 10, you had a free engine displacement, needed power assisted rack and pinion steering. It was really hardcore built towards more of an OE style vehicle. But the Japan Grand Touring Car Championship had its inaugural season in 1993. Limitations on JDM cars and their horsepower numbers began as early as 1988 with certain sports cars. So how would a 300 GT class requirement in JGTC determine sport car manufacturers to lie about their horsepower? Call me Shaggy up in this bitch, all right? And for this reason, we put the stamp of FI disbelief. All in favor, say aye. Sean, thank you. All right. Likely the most accurate and realistic reasons why this unofficial agreement was made, and generally still not discussed by manufacturers, is because of something that was stewing all the way back in the 1970s and even the late 60s, the Bosuzoku and the recklessness of driving groups. Now, this is where things get generally pretty interesting. The Bosuzoku, as we talked about before, and you can watch the video up here, you know what I'm saying? Was a group of post-World War II individuals that lived a life on the edge to curb their void of purpose after most being dedicated to give their life in World War II. And then they didn't give their life in World War II, so they came back to Japan and had to figure out what their purpose in life was. And as the rebelliousness of the Bosuzoku began to entice the next younger generation, Japan needed to find ways to restrict the ability to be reckless. And so they did. And this was a really big issue in Japan in the late 70s and early 80s. With the collaborations of JAMA, or the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association, Japan began to enact restrictions on vehicles, such as speed limited restrictions of 180 kilometers an hour or 111 miles per hour. This was on motorcycles and cars. And as the 70s left and the 80s came in, this really helped in terms of curbing recklessness and speed. But Japan started to face themselves with another massive issue. Japan had more than 10,000 fatalities alone, and pair that with a highly dense population and a relatively small square-like space ratio, this just put steroids to the issue and was beginning to cause trouble. In 1988, 10,000 fatalities on the road due to driving was a big deal to Japan. So companies, associations, and of course the JAMA-WAMA then went back to attack the growing horsepower numbers that were coming from the cars, as they thought if they made cars slower, death would ultimately decline with it. Yes, the unintentional release of the then perfect, beautiful, nothing wrong with it, Fairlady Z fit this storyline, and with that car's release coming in at around 276 horsepower, auto manufacturers unofficially agreed to harbor and own the 276 horsepower cap on their performance vehicles. And all of a sudden, the death rate began to decline in Japan when related to automotive accidents. It was a miracle. The JAMA WAMA and the big manufacturers really came together and completely didn't agree that this was due to the horsepower limit in any way, shape, or form. Like at all. You see, companies like Nissan, Mazda, Mitsubishi, and Toyota all said they had 276 horsepower, but at the end of the day, the motors had 280, 300, even 320 horsepower in all actuality. But because it said 276 on paper, this made JAMA WAMA in Japan pretty happy. Fingers were crossed behind the back, and while the staggering and scary number of automotive, deaths declined, manufacturers in JAMA continued to let like the sleeping dog lie, as the number was going to the right direction, even though it had nothing to do with the power. And it's kind of like, they knew, it was kind of sort of like, okay, let's just ignore it. And that's what happened. You just stay right there, boy. Don't do a thing. We're gonna go make 320 horsepower out of a car that's gonna be $100,000 in 2021, okay? You just hang out back there. In the 90s, while horsepower was increasing, Japan's safety equipment was also developing at a much more rapid pace because they had a ton of money. So much so to compete with the international expectations that forced their hand to get better at things like airbags, anti-lock brakes, steering racks, and pre-tensioner seatbelts. These things that we really don't think about were the reason that a lot of these accidents and deaths started to go down. The accidents may or may not have declined, but people had seatbelts that were pre-tensioned. So lives weren't in such a high risk. And if you guys know or have owned an old Japanese sports car, you know that they're equivalently just a piece of metal that will crush you. So they let the sleeping dog lie all the way up until July of 2004, until the former chairman of JAMA WAMA, Itaru Koeda, went to before everyone to eventually say, there's actually no correlation for the last 2 decades between speed and road fatalities. And Koeda would go on then to ask for the gentleman's agreement to essentially be abolished. And that was it. I mean, just as fast as it came up was just as fast as it fell, with Honda being one of the first manufacturers to introduce a 300 horsepower car on paper right after it was being said, and it was called the old Honda Legend. The inevitable end to the spit handshake shook up the Japanese market, where manufacturers have now publicly gone back to climbing horsepower numbers for the sake of the marketing tag, even though it's been happening since like 1986, 1987, and into 1988. Except now, instead of it being behind closed doors, it's just in front of you. It's like, okay, you were doing it anyway, but then now you can promote it. So was there a gentleman's agreement? Yes. Was it between manufacturers though? No. It was really between JAMA, and JAMA would have just told them to not do business anymore. Was it because of the airplane manufacturing limiting dyno numbers or maximum speed limits? Maybe influence so, but ultimately it was nothing more than an attempt from the Japanese Association attempting to bring down the risks and dangers that was founded through the roots of the Bosuzoku driving behavior and the growing concern within a country that is predominantly focused, on controlling safe, overarching help so that we're always looking out for the betterment of the whole. And that's really why the gentleman's agreement ever existed, which is unlike USA. USA over here, we're just handing out anyone with $60,000 a red key with 800 horsepower from a domestic car that comes with skinnies and all sorts of crazy drift stuff. And then you got bumper guards that people still don't know how to take off, which is really ridiculous. But what do you think about this? Let us know below. And of course, if you're looking for aftermarket wheels, tires, or suspension, be sure to hit us up over at fitmentindustries.com. I'm Alex from Fitment Industries, and we will see you later. Peace. Oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. Now I'll say goodbye. Goodbye.